The Adegbite family was the kind of family people admired. Living in a comfortable home in the heart of Lagos, Kunal and Adiz Adegbite worked hard to provide the best life for their only son, 9-year-old Femi. Kunal, a financial consultant, often had long hours, while Adiz, a fashion entrepreneur, traveled frequently for work. Their careers flourished, but it meant they had little time during the day to care for Femi. Determined to ensure he was in good hands, they hired a nanny, Auntie Grace. She came highly recommended by a close friend and had experience working with children. From the first meeting, she was warm, kind, and seemed to genuinely love kids. Her calm demeanor and firm yet gentle approach reassured the Adegbites that they had made the right choice. Femi, an energetic and curious boy, quickly bonded with Auntie Grace. She knew how to make him laugh, told him stories in Yoruba and English, and even helped him with homework. His parents were relieved, believing their son was in the best possible hands. But unknown to them, shadows lurked beneath Auntie Grace's warm smile. At night, when Femi's parents returned home, all seemed perfect. His schoolwork was done, he was bathed and fed, and he always had exciting stories about his day. Yet, the walls of their home held secrets. The Adegbites trusted Auntie Grace completely, perhaps too completely. Auntie Grace quickly became an indispensable part of the Adegbite household. She was efficient, never complained, and took care of Femi as if he were her own. She cooked his favorite meals, braided his hair when Adiz was too busy, and always had a story to tell when he felt lonely. At first, everything seemed normal. She took him to school, picked him up, and made sure he did his homework before watching TV. The Adegbites often praised her, relieved that their son was in good hands. But slowly, little things started to change. One evening, Kunal noticed Femi humming a tune he had never heard before. "Who taught you that song?" he asked. "Auntie Grace," Femi said casually. The lyrics were in Yoruba, but when Kunal paid attention, he realized the song carried strange meanings. About keeping secrets, about trusting no one but family. Kunal brushed it off. After all, Auntie Grace was just being playful. But if only he had paid closer attention, he might have seen the first warning signs. Femi adored Auntie Grace. She let him do things his parents didn't, like staying up late, watching movies that weren't exactly for kids, and even skipping a little bit of homework. "Your parents won't know if we don't tell them," she would say with a wink. At first, it seemed harmless, but soon, her requests became stranger. "Don't tell Mummy and Daddy that I let you drink Coke," she whispered one afternoon. "It's our little secret." Femi, feeling special, nodded. It felt exciting to have secrets with Auntie Grace. Then, a week later, she gave him her phone to play games and told him, "Swipe left, but don't tell anyone what you see." Femi did as he was told. And that day, he saw something he didn't quite understand but knew felt wrong. And yet, he kept the secret. As days turned into weeks, Femi began changing in subtle ways. He grew more withdrawn, less eager to tell his parents about his day. He no longer laughed as much, and sometimes, when Adiz hugged him, he pulled away too soon. Kunal noticed. "Femi, everything okay?" "Yes, Daddy," Femi answered too quickly. Adiz noticed, too. "Are you sure?" Femi hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Mummy." But deep inside, a part of him wondered if that was still true. One evening, Auntie Grace sat beside Femi with a mischievous grin. "Let's play a game." "What game?" he asked. "It's called, Who Can Keep the Biggest Secret?" Femi hesitated. "I don't know, Auntie. Mummy says we shouldn't keep secrets." Auntie Grace chuckled. "Oh, but this is a special game. If you win, I'll let you do something fun, something only grown-ups do." His eyes widened with curiosity. "Really?" She nodded. And that night, the game began. At school, Femi's teacher noticed something odd. He had started drawing strange things. Figures with no faces, people whispering in the dark. "Femi, what's this?" she asked gently. "Just a story Auntie Grace told me," he muttered. The teacher frowned. She had met Auntie Grace before, always polite, always smiling. But something felt off. She made a note to call Femi's parents. But before she could, Auntie Grace found out. And that night she told Femi, "If you ever tell anyone about our game, something bad will happen." Adiz was scrolling through her phone when she saw a message from Femi's teacher. "I'd like to discuss something about Femi." Concerned, she called Femi. "Baby, is everything okay at school?" "Yes, Mummy. Your teacher says she wants to talk to us." Femi's hands turned cold. If his parents spoke to his teacher, they might find out everything. and Auntie Grace had warned him. Bad things would happen. So, he did something he had never done before. He lied. "She probably just wants to talk about my grades," he said, forcing a smile. And for the first time, Adiz believed a lie her son told her. Later that night, Adiz told Kunal about the message from Femi's teacher. "I think we should meet with her," she said. Kunal agreed, and they set up an appointment. Unbeknownst to them, Femi overheard. Panic filled his chest. If his parents found out, they might send Auntie Grace away. And Auntie Grace had promised, "If you let them take me away, you will regret it." He had no choice. He had to stop them. The morning of the parent-teacher meeting, something unexpected happened. Femi accidentally spilled tea on his mother's blouse. "Mummy, I'm sorry," he cried. Adiz sighed. "It's okay, baby. I'll change quickly." Minutes later, a flat tire delayed them even more. By the time they got to the school, the teacher had left. Kunal frowned. "That's strange. Why would she leave so soon?" Femi, standing between them, exhaled in relief. He had won, this time. But the truth had a way of resurfacing. That night, Adiz lay in bed, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. The teacher's urgency, Femi's odd behavior, the way he had avoided her eyes. She turned to Kunal. "I think something is wrong with our son." Kunal sighed. Maybe he's just growing up. But deep in her heart, Adiz knew this was not just about growing up. Something was happening to Femi, and she was going to find out what. Adiz couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Femi had always been an open child, full of stories about school and his friends, but lately, he had become distant. He still smiled, still played, but something was off. One evening, as she was folding laundry, she found a crumpled paper in Femi's pocket. It was a drawing. 2 figures, one tall and dark, standing behind a smaller one. The smaller figure had no mouth. Her stomach twisted. What did it mean? She showed Kunal, but he brushed it off. "It's probably just his imagination," he said. But Adiz knew better. Femi sat quietly in the living room as Auntie Grace brought him a plate of puff-puff. "You're my special boy," she cooed, brushing his hair back. He forced a smile. The truth was he was scared. He had tried to tell his teacher, but Auntie Grace had found out. And when she looked at him with that cold, knowing gaze, he knew he couldn't risk it again. "Remember our game?" she whispered. "You're winning." Femi nodded, but deep inside, he felt like he was losing. That night, Adiz had a terrible dream. She saw Femi standing in a dark hallway, whispering to someone. She tried to reach him, but the shadows wrapped around her, pulling her back. She woke up in a sweat. It was just a dream, she told herself. But when she got up to check on Femi, she found his bedroom door slightly open. Inside, he was curled in a ball, his tiny fingers gripping the bedsheet tightly. What was he so afraid of? Femi had begun hearing whispers at night. Sometimes they were soft like the wind. Other times they felt real, too close to ignore. "You trust me, don't you?" Auntie Grace had said earlier. Yes, he trusted her. Didn't he? But if he did, why did his stomach hurt whenever she smiled at him? Femi's teacher had noticed his change in behavior. The once lively boy was now quiet, avoiding eye contact, his drawings darker and more cryptic. She sent another message to Adiz. That evening, when Adiz checked her phone and saw the teacher's name again, a deep sense of unease settled in her chest. She needed to talk to her son. "Femi, is everything okay?" Adiz asked at dinner. "Yes, Mummy." "Are you sure?" He nodded too quickly. Kunal noticed. "You can tell us anything, son." Femi's grip on his fork tightened. Across the room, Auntie Grace stood in the doorway watching. He forced himself to smile. "I'm fine, Daddy." But the truth was buried deep. One evening, while clearing the dinner table, Femi accidentally dropped a plate. It shattered into pieces, and Auntie Grace's eyes darkened. "That was careless," she said in a low voice, bending down to his level. "Careless boys get punished." Femi swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Auntie." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Clean it up before your parents see." His hands shook as he picked up the shards. Adiz walked into the kitchen just as Femi finished cleaning. "What happened?" "Nothing, Mummy. I broke a plate." She frowned. His voice was flat, almost robotic. When she glanced at Auntie Grace, the nanny gave her a reassuring smile. It was an accident. But Adiz saw something in her son's eyes that sent chills down her spine. Fear. That night, Femi lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Tell Mummy. Tell Daddy." But Auntie Grace's voice echoed in his head. If you tell, something bad will happen. Tears filled his eyes. He wanted to be free. But how? Adiz could no longer ignore the signs. Her son was afraid. Of what? She didn't know. But she was going to find out. She watched as Auntie Grace led Femi to bed, her hand resting too long on his back. The way Femi flinched did not go unnoticed. Something was terribly, terribly wrong, and Adiz was about to uncover it. Adiz sat in the living room long after everyone had gone to bed, staring at the baby monitor she had placed in Femi's room. The screen was dark, but her mind raced with thoughts. Femi had changed. He had become secretive, withdrawn, and hesitant to speak freely. His once bright, eager eyes now carried a hidden weight. She turned to Kunal. Something is wrong, I know it. Kunal sighed. You're overthinking it. But deep inside, Adiz knew this wasn't just a phase. The next afternoon, Femi searched frantically through his room. Where is it? He muttered under his breath. What are you looking for, sweetheart? Adiz asked. My teddy. His voice trembled. Auntie Grace said it's gone because I talked too much. Adiz froze. She said that. Femi's lips pressed together. He shook his head quickly. No, I mean, I lost it. Adiz's heart pounded. Femi was hiding something. That night, as Adiz passed by Femi's room, she heard hushed voices. Remember, we have a secret, don't we? Auntie Grace's voice was soft, almost hypnotic. There was a pause. Then Femi's whisper. Yes, Auntie. Adiz's breath caught in her throat. She stepped forward, but by the time she opened the door, Auntie Grace was tucking Femi in with a warm smile. But Femi's eyes were filled with something else, fear. Kunal sat at his desk, scrolling through his emails when Adiz stormed in. I heard her talking to him, she said. She's making him keep secrets. Kunal sighed. Adiz, you're being paranoid. No. Kunal, listen. He rubbed his forehead. She's been with us for years. She loves Femi. If anything was wrong, he would tell us. But Adiz wasn't so sure anymore. At school, Femi's teacher pulled Adiz aside. Mrs. Adegbite, I wanted to show you something. She handed over a piece of paper. It was a drawing, Femi's usual stick figures, but this one was different. A small child stood alone, surrounded by tall, dark figures. Above them were the words, Secrets are heavy. Adiz's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. One evening, Adiz came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, too quiet. She called for Femi. No answer. She checked his room, the kitchen, even the backyard. Nothing. Her heart pounded. Just as she was about to panic, Auntie Grace walked in, holding Femi's hand. We were just playing hide and seek, she said smoothly. But Femi wouldn't meet his mother's eyes. That night, Adiz made a decision. She called her sister, Igioma. Sis, I need your help, she said. Igioma listened carefully. Ada, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Adiz exhaled shakily. I don't know what to do. Watch. Listen. And most importantly, don't ignore the signs. Determined to uncover the truth, Adiz installed a small hidden camera in Femi's room. She needed proof, something Kunal couldn't dismiss. That night, she sat in bed, watching the live feed from her phone. At first, nothing happened. Then, just past midnight, Auntie Grace entered the room. Adiz's breath caught as she watched her lean down and whisper something to Femi. Whatever she said made him shiver. The next morning, Adiz confronted Femi. Baby, you know you can tell me anything, right? Femi hesitated. I want to tell you, Mummy, but... He looked toward the door, his little hands gripping the bedsheet. Adiz's heart broke. But what, sweetheart? Femi swallowed hard. I'm scared. Adiz pulled him into a hug. You don't have to be. But the fear in his eyes told her. It wasn't that simple. Adiz knew the truth was close. She could feel it. She watched as Auntie Grace moved around the house, humming softly, as if she wasn't hiding something sinister. But Adiz wasn't going to sit back anymore. She was going to protect her son, even if it meant confronting the darkness herself. Adiz sat in the dark, eyes glued to the screen of her phone as the hidden camera feed played. Auntie Grace entered Femi's room again. She leaned close, speaking in a hushed tone. You know what happens if you tell, right? Her voice was sickly sweet. Femi nodded hesitantly. Adiz's hands clenched into fists. Her stomach churned with anger and fear. The next morning, Adiz couldn't hold back any longer. Femi, she said gently, kneeling beside him. Tell me what's going on. Femi's hands gripped his bedsheet. His lips trembled. I can't, Mummy. Why, baby? He hesitated, then whispered. She said bad things will happen if I do. Adi's heart cracked. Auntie Grace had been poisoning his mind all along. Kunnel was still skeptical. She's like family, Ada, he said, shaking his head. Why would she hurt Femi? Adi's anger boiled over. You don't see it because you're never here. Kunnel frowned but said nothing. She handed him her phone. Watch this. The moment the video played, his face drained of color. Kunnel paced the living room, his jaw clenched. We need to fire her. Adiz shook her head. No, we need to find out everything first. If we act now, she might cover her tracks. Kunnel exhaled sharply. Then what do we do? Adiz's eyes darkened. We watch. We listen. And when the time is right, we make her pay. Auntie Grace had no idea she was being watched. She carried on as usual. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of Femi. But Adiz noticed something different. Femi flinched when she got too close. His laughter was forced. The once loving bond between them had turned into something dark and fearful. And Adiz was done pretending not to see it. This was worse than she had imagined. One evening, Adiz sat with Igioma. I need to know more about her, she said. Where did she come from? Who is she? Igioma frowned. She's always been reserved. Adiz's mind raced. Maybe the past held the answers she needed, and she was determined to find them. Adiz took a bold step. She visited Auntie Grace's former employer. The woman's expression darkened when she heard the name. You hired her? Adiz's heart pounded. What happened? She worked for us for years. Then, strange things started happening. The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. And then one day, our son changed. Adiz felt cold dread seep into her bones. That night, Femi woke up screaming. Adiz and Kunnel rushed to his room. I don't want to go with her, he sobbed, clinging to his mother. Adiz held him close. You don't have to, baby. Kunnel turned to Auntie Grace, who stood in the doorway, her face unreadable. Maybe we should let her go, Kunnel whispered. The next morning, Adiz walked into the kitchen to find Auntie Grace waiting. Her smile was different this time, cold, knowing. You've been watching, haven't you? Adiz's blood ran cold. Auntie Grace leaned in. You think you know everything, but you don't. Then she turned and walked away, humming softly. Adiz's hands shook. This wasn't over. Femi was quiet that day. Too quiet. Then, as Adiz tucked him into bed, he whispered, Mummy, please don't let her take me. Tears burned in her eyes. I won't, baby. That was it. Auntie Grace had to go. But Adiz knew this battle was far from over. Kunnel paced back and forth in the living room, the air thick with tension. Adiz sat quietly, watching him, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion and fear. She has to go, Kunnel finally said, voice low and firm. We can't let this go on any longer. Adiz looked up, her jaw clenched. But how do we make her leave? She's so calculating. Kunnel stopped pacing, kneeling in front of her. We'll do whatever it takes. We'll protect our son, no matter what. Adiz nodded slowly, determination hardening her features. Then we confront her tomorrow. Together. That night, they stayed up late, plotting and preparing. Neither slept, their minds racing with fear and anger. But above all, with a fierce resolve to protect Femi at all costs. Morning light filtered softly into the kitchen as Auntie Grace prepared breakfast, humming a familiar tune. The Adegbites entered, their expressions set, determined. Kunnel cleared his throat. Grace, we need to talk. She turned slowly, her face unreadable. Yes. Adiz's voice was shaky but firm. We need you to leave. Today. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Auntie Grace tilted her head, a cold smile playing at her lips. Are you sure you want that? Kunnel's fists clenched. Yes. Auntie Grace simply nodded, wiping her hands slowly on a dish towel. If that's what you want. Her eyes, however, glinted with a dark promise, sending chills down Adiz's spine. That afternoon, Adiz found Femi curled up in a corner of his room, clutching his knees. She sat beside him gently. Femi, sweetheart, you can tell me anything, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Femi looked up, tears welling in his eyes. Auntie Grace said if I told you, bad things would happen. Adiz's heart shattered. Oh, baby. Nothing bad will happen, I promise. Femi leaned into her embrace, his small body trembling. She made me keep secrets, Mummy. I didn't want to, but she said I had to. Adiz hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. You're safe now. We won't let her hurt you. Later that night, Adiz's phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. You don't know who you're dealing with. Be careful. Her hands shook as she read the text. Who would send such a message? What did they know? She showed Cunnel, who frowned deeply. This can't be a coincidence. Adie's mind raced. Was Auntie Grace more dangerous than they had imagined? Were they in over their heads? Cunnel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this. Together. But Adie's gut twisted with unease. The battle was only just beginning. Adie spent hours combing through old records, desperate for answers. Finally, she found it. A report from years ago. The name, Grace Otunba. The file was thin, but one detail stood out. A case of a missing boy. Femi's age. Adie's breath hitched. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest as she read through the sparse details. No resolution, no closure. Just a boy who vanished without a trace. Was this who they had trusted with their son? A woman with secrets buried deep in her past? Adie's closed the laptop, her hands trembling. Cunnel entered the room, concerned. What did you find? Adie's eyes filled with fear. We don't really know who she is. The next morning, Adie's cornered Auntie Grace in the kitchen. The tension was thick, like a gathering storm. What did you do to that other child? Adie's voice trembled with anger. Auntie Grace looked at her, unfazed. What child? Don't play games with me, Adie snapped. The boy who disappeared. Where is he? Auntie Grace's lips curled into a slow, chilling smile. He was special, just like Femi. Adie's blood ran cold. Get out. Now. Auntie Grace didn't move. Instead, she leaned in close, whispering, You can't protect him from everything. Adie stepped back, her breath ragged. She called for Cunnel. She needs to leave. Now. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was tense, brittle as glass. Every creak, every whisper of wind sent shivers down Adie's spine. She checked the locks twice, then thrice, her heart racing. Femi was asleep, his small chest rising and falling softly. Cunnel stayed awake beside her, their eyes darting to every shadow. Hours crawled by. Midnight passed. Then, in the dead silence, they heard a soft creak from Femi's room. Adie shot up. Did you hear that? Cunnel nodded, fear flashing in his eyes. Together, they moved towards their son's room, hearts pounding, each step heavier than the last. Morning broke with a harsh light that felt like a cruel joke. Adie's rushed to Femi's room, flinging open the door. The bed was empty, the sheets cold. Femi, she called, voice cracking. No response. Cunnel joined her, eyes wide with panic. Where is he? Adie's gaze snapped to the window, slightly open, curtains fluttering like taunting whispers. A scream tore from her throat. Femi was gone. Adie stumbled through the house, heart thundering in her chest. Cunnel grabbed his phone, dialing the police with trembling hands. Tears blurred Adie's vision. Where did she take him? She cried. Cunnel grabbed the car keys. We have to find him. Adie's nodded, wiping her tears. We can't waste time. With desperation burning in their veins, they sped off into the city streets, hearts aching, driven by fear and fury. The sun dipped below the horizon as they pulled up to an old, dilapidated house on the outskirts of Lagos. Adie's hands shook as she pushed open the car door. Cunnel gripped her arm. Are you sure about this? Adie's nodded fiercely. I have to be. Inside, shadows danced across peeling walls. And then a sound. A faint, terrified whimper. Adie's heart leapt into her throat. Femi! She rushed forward, and there, in the dim light, stood Auntie Grace, shadowed, smiling, waiting.